transformation, strategic investment, and sustainable fiscal policies for inclusive economic growth. So our objective this morning is to provide you with clear and practical overview in terms of the key budget measures and the policy changes that have been set forth, the revenue proposals and the expenditure priorities of the government. Hosting you today, my name is Jennifer Kajuna. I am an Associate Director at KPMG in Tanzania. We can probably look at what is on today's agenda. If you can just move to the previous slide. Yes, so we will start our session with getting opening remarks from our tax partner, Samuel Isupu. We will then deep dive into the economic analysis and overview in terms of what the budget has set forth. And this will be presented by our partner, Fabiola Sebuyoya. We'll then get a chance to look at the proposed tax changes, which will be presented by our senior manager within the tax unit, Sabato Mwaliki. We will then have a chance to listen to our team of seasoned experts, a panel discussion where we will get to discuss the tax changes, the policy measures that have been put in place in the direct taxes and highlight of the EAC as well. We will then have a chance to ask questions. We'll have a Q&A session where all of us will engage. So we're hoping that this session will be a very interactive one. As much as we will have a Q&A session towards the end, we encourage you to use the chat functionality. If you have any questions, comments, or need for clarification, please post them in the chat and my team will be happy to respond. We'll then finalize with closing remarks from our country managing partner, Alexander Njombe. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Samuel Isupu to set the scene and get us started. Over to you, Samuel.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure having you today this morning as we unpack the Minister of Finance budget that was presented yesterday to the Parliament in Dodoma. We have seen it's a very ambitious budget of 6.23 trillion, which is the first budget in the Tanzania Vision 2050. And this marks a deliberate shift toward building a more resilient, inclusive, digital-driven economy. We have seen that in the budget that was read yesterday, the government is still guided by the objective to sustain growth. And we have seen that for the financial year 2025 budget, the growth was about 5.9, but this year the projected growth is going to be about 6.3. So it's a very deliberate move to ensure that we expand the economy. The other thing that we have seen as a theme in that budget is that the government is still maintaining low and stable inflation. We have been between 3 to 5% inflation for the past 4 or 5 years, and the government still wants to maintain as part of the objective the same inflation level. And again, given that the funding that we're getting more or less will be driven from internal sources, one of the things that the government will be looking at is to narrow its fiscal deficit in terms of borrowings and how it is going to be spending for public expenditure. In terms of the budget on its totality, we have seen the number of measures. One, in terms of strengthening domestic revenue mobilization. We have seen measures around improving strategic investments in infrastructure, social services, and productive sectors in terms of agriculture, industry, and mining. At the core of the budget, one of the other things that we have seen is that it still categorized the recognition of sustainable development, which requires sound macroeconomic management and a tax system that is a fair, predictable, and supportive of the private sector-led growth. You could tell in terms of the budget itself, it had a number of changes, and these changes were more or less to realign incentives. We have seen incentives in various sectors that might be coming through. My colleagues, when they're presenting the specifics in terms of the economic outlook and the tax proposed measures, I will be able to look at. But we can see in terms of the government trying to widen the tax base. You can see now the government also looking at how can they now formalize the informal sector, more or less in terms of, for instance, introduction of the tax holiday for small informal sector traders, just to ensure that they have at least 12 months to register. And by the time they go to their second year, now they've been included as part of the tax net that the government will be able to collect. Again, in the tax system, I've seen tightened measures in terms of promoting the local markets, the local industries, by more or less putting more charges and taxes and duties from an excise and inputs to discourage more importation to come through as part of finished goods, but rather using our local industries to be able to produce. And again, some of the changes you will see is that the government wants to go green. My colleagues will definitely speak about that in terms of what are those specific exemptions that are given from electrical vehicles, from LNG usage, in terms of how can we go green as a country and reduce our carbon emissions. At the end of that, the defining focus, again, you can see in the budget that was read is around digital transformation. The minister spoke about how can they align IDRAS, for instance, from the tax authority, and TAUSI, the government-led infrastructure, in terms of ensuring that they have data that can be used across all these units. And going again in terms of payment structures, more or less to look at how can digital payments be done across key sectors and ensure tax administration at the same time, but through the use of ICT. In terms of these reforms, in a brief that I've spoken about, they all intend not only to seal revenue leakages, but to modernize the business environment, to deepen financial inclusion, and to promote transparency and efficiency in the public finance. Collectively, the proposed measures signal a clear direction of the government for the year 2026-2027 to leverage on technology, to have a strategic taxation system in terms of widening the tax base and having more taxpayers coming into the bracket. And again, to build a prudent spending, which is competitive between the government authorities, industrialization, and again, inclusion to the Tanzanian economy. So with that, as a few closing remarks in terms of the reflection from the government's budget of yesterday, I would like to welcome my colleague, Fabiola, to take us through the economic outlook.
Thank you, Samuel. I'll just share my screen now. Okay, so good morning, everyone. My name is Fabiola, and I'm a tax partner here at KPMG. I will spend the next 20 minutes taking you through the economic outlook, the trends that we have seen recently from a global and country perspective. Starting with the global overview, according to the recent report that has been published by the IMF on the World Economic Review, it appears that the 2020s have experienced more disruption compared to previous years, given the geopolitical trends that we are currently seeing. And as you'll see in the orange bar, the 2020's geopolitical risk seems to have increased significantly for all markets in the world, the highest being Europe, followed by the Asia Pacific and Middle East and Africa. This significant increase on the geopolitical risk seems to be attributed by the shift in US trade policies, the Russia-Ukraine war, and now the Middle East conflict.
And then the World Economic Forum also anticipates that we will be heading towards a weaker economy globally. And this is based on the survey that was done by the chief economists across the world. As you can see here, is that May 2026, only about 8% of chief economists believed that we are heading towards a somewhat stronger economy in the next 12 months. But comparing that to 3 years ago, in May 2023, about 42% of the chief economists believed that the economy would be stronger in the next 12 months. So that perception is also contributed by the geopolitical tensions that I've talked about, the AI developments within different markets in the world. The other area that we have considered is the specific details on the Middle East conflict, which appears to be directly impacting the GDP growth and the headline inflation across the globe. So prior to the conflict, where you see the blue and the red bars, the GDP was slowly increasing. But then post-conflict, and as at the report of April 2026 by the World Economic Outlook by the IMF, it appears as if the GDP growth is starting to weaken in 2026 and is expected to weaken more in 2027. In terms of the inflation, you can see prior to the Middle East conflict, inflation was somehow okay, but it is expected to significantly increase in the 2026 and 2027 years. And these statistics have been categorized in terms of where we expect maybe an adverse scenario and where there's a severe scenario. If there's a severe scenario of the war, the inflation is likely to reach very high rates. This is the impact of the Middle East conflict in terms of sectors. You'll see from this report that the most affected sector is obviously the energy and materials, followed by the supply chain and transport or logistics, and then the leisure and travel. Some of us may have experienced this from the travels where there are delays or cancellations of flights and lack of access to some areas within the world. Some sectors seem to have been least affected, such as the information technology and digital communications, as well as medical, healthcare, and education. Despite the recent Middle East crisis, we are now seeing the energy prices slowly falling, but I think the question is whether that fall is long-term, given that there seems to be little chances of the resolution of the conflict in the near future. And then in the midst of this conflict, the IMF has made some recommendations for policies for jurisdictions to consider in terms of their policies, one of them being maintaining a flexible but orderly exchange rate, also to apply temporary fiscal measures in terms of giving out subsidies or tax cuts or price caps. And we have seen this being applied in the minister's budget of yesterday, where they're proposing to make some reliefs towards the use of, say, electric vehicles and other related measures. Also, the IMF is proposing the reduction of cumbersome regulations to promote entrepreneurship and innovation. Also, international cooperation seems to be one of the areas that can be improved in dealing with the crisis. as well as digitization and adoption of AI. Of course, there's also a question of whether in the long run, countries should rely more on domestic supply of goods rather than imports. And so countries are encouraged to consider import substitution. So that's in terms of the recent trends we have seen globally. In terms of the Tanzania outlook, the African Development estimates that the Tanzanian GDP is projected to grow by about 5.4% this year and 6.1% in 2027, despite the geopolitical crisis. And then they expect for there to be increased economic activities given the structural reforms that are currently ongoing in the country, which they expect will improve the business environment. The AFDB also expects for there to be stability in food supply, in the energy situation. The youth unemployment rate is likely to be at 10%, which then indicates that there could be limited opportunities in terms of economic and investments. Key drivers of this position are really formalization through digitization, fostering the private sector-led growth, and improving business environment. Some of the measures which we have seen in yesterday's budget, as you will see in my coming slides. Despite these expected results, there could be some downside risks in terms of climate fluctuations, which then would affect the agricultural sector in Tanzania and also the global shock. In terms of the business environment, the bank has conducted an assessment called the Business Ready Assessment, and based on the report for the 2025 year, Tanzania seems to be ranking between 73 and 30. Now, these rankings are all out of 100. So the areas that we seem to be doing well are really around labor in terms of regulating our labor relations. Investors feel like the laws are about 73% good. And then utility, this is really the cost that investors incur to access different utilities such as electricity, water, and communication. And then business entry seems to also be on a positive outlook at 72 in terms of the ease of registering a business and starting to operate. There could be some improvement around the time taken to resolve a business, to dissolve a business, because as it is now, it appears that the processes that are required to be followed for someone to deregister a business are taking too long. And the other area that we could be doing better is around market competition in terms of our fair competition rules, and also business location. This is really around access to land and permits, as well as access to property in general. Moving on to tax collections over the years. So as it is today, and if you compare with the past 10 years, the tax collections seem to have more than doubled. Because 10 years ago in 2026, the collections stood at around $6 billion US. But as of June this year, the expectation based on the budget speech is about $14 billion. And this collection is mainly categorized into domestic revenue, which forms about 20%. Domestic revenue is really the SMEs And then the large taxpayers seem to be contributing about 40% of these collections. And then the rest, which is the 40%, seems to be attributable to customs and excise. This trend has been like this for years. And now there's a question of whether the SME's contribution to the tax pot is really growing, and whether there could be some reforms that should be passed to promote the growth of the SMEs so as to allow them to contribute much more in the tax collections. And then this is the tax to GDP ratio over the years. As you see, given the significant increase over the years, the tax to GDP ratio also has, of June this year, it is expected to be at 13.2%. And as of June next year, it is expected to be at 13.7%. It follows the trend of the domestic revenue to GDP ratios. That means the domestic revenue is largely attributable to the tax revenue in the country, as we will see in the coming slides. The other area that we've considered is really around the issuance of tax refunds by the Revenue Authority. We have seen a significant shift this year as compared to the same time last year. As of March 2026, the TRA had only issued about 894 billion shillings, which is about 357 million US dollars. While at the same time last year, TRA had already issued about half a billion US dollars. We think this is attributable to different positions that they have taken in terms of businesses that have not yet commenced production, where they say, for example, VAT refunds should not be issued to these entities up until when they have started production. So that's in terms of tax collections. And then on the economic overview, as alluded by Sam earlier, the budget has set a theme for different areas, and the main priority areas include the increase in the domestic revenue collection, but also the use of ICT and improvement in administrative sectors, completion of ongoing development projects and programs, strengthening productive sectors, as well as improving social services and investment in business environment. One of the key developments that we have seen yesterday in the minister's budget is really around trying to promote a cashless economy, where the minister has proposed for some specified transactions, such as the purchase of significant properties with significant value, or the purchase of airtime vouchers should be done online. In terms of revenue targets, it is expected that during the coming year, expenditure will be at about 62.3 trillion, equivalent to 24 billion US dollars. And out of the 62 trillion, this budget is expected to be funded, about 74% of this budget is expected to be funded by domestic revenue. And when you look further into the composition of the domestic revenue, you'll see that 85% of the expected domestic revenue comes from tax collections. In addition to the 74, the remaining 26% seems to be expected to come from grants, concessional loans, and non-concessional loans. In achieving this budget of 74% in achieving the 74% domestic revenue, the minister has proposed some initiatives that they're going to adopt during the year, which includes the continued implementation of the reforms that have been proposed by the Presidential Commission for Tax Reforms. We have seen some of these reforms being adopted in the budget. I think the question remains to what extent and by when the rest of the reforms are going to be adopted. The minister is also proposing to strengthen the relationship with taxpayers through various business associations, such as the Tanzania National Business Council and the CEO Roundtable in Tanzania. Also to promote the use of AI and big data, as well as integration of various government systems, so that the government can have real-time access to taxpayers' information and other organizations' information. Also, the government is looking at improving the management of state-owned enterprises to fast-track the payment of dividends to the government as the shareholder. There's also a proposal to introduce an award called the Patriotism Award for businesses that will have been identified to have used and adopted the EFDMS, the electronic invoice issuing system, properly. It is yet to be mentioned when, by when this will be implemented, but we'll wait to see once the bill is out. In terms of the expenditure, I had said earlier, the expense is expected to be at 62.3 trillion, and 67 of this amount, 67%, will be directed towards recurrent expenditure. That would be wages, debt repayments, etc. And the remaining 33% is expected to be directed to development projects, which include the Bagamoyo Marine Corridor, the Mchuchuma and Lilanga projects, Dodoma Rare Minerals Hub, the LNG processing plant in Lindi, etc. This table here shows the budget targets that have been proposed against previous years. So the GDP growth is expected to be at 6.3% compared to 6% last year and 5.4% in 2025 and 2026. Inflation rate remains the same as the previous 2 years, between 3 and 5%. Domestic revenue target, I've said earlier, about 74% of the total expected revenue, whereas last year, domestic revenue only contributed about 71.6%, and the year before last only contributed at about 70%. Domestic revenue to GDP ratio is expected in the coming year to be at 17%, whereas last year it was at 16.7%, and the other year was at 15.7%. Tax revenue has increased by 10 trillion shillings as compared to 2024, 2025. So currently the expectation is at 39.1 trillion for the coming year. And the tax revenue to GDP ratio, as we've seen previously, is expected to be at 13.7% compared to 13.3% and 12.9%. Budget deficit is expected to remain at less than 3%, as it was the case for last year and the other year. Also, forex cover is expected to be about 4 months of total imports, similar to the target that was put in previous years. This is really a comparison of GDP growth of Tanzania as compared to the EAC region and the SADC region. So Tanzania, you'll see it's in blue here. The GDP seems to be experiencing a steady growth, which is similar to the SADC. The East African Community GDP seems to be having a sharp increase and then expecting to have a sharp decrease this year. This sharp increase here in 2025 is mainly attributed by the improved economic conditions in South Sudan, which then when combined with the other regions has significantly increased the GDP growth rate for the East African community. Main contributors to the growth of the Tanzanian GDP are really around agriculture, which is the key sector in the country, followed by construction, and then mining, trade, and then transport and logistics. Looking at inflation comparison between Tanzania, the EAC, and the SADC, Tanzania remains at a lower inflation rate within the government target of 3 to 5%, but also below the EAC and the SADC performance, as well as the EAC and SADC targets. The inflation really in Tanzania is driven by the food prices. So having seen all that and having heard what the minister proposed yesterday, what next? When we look ahead, we see that the projected population as at 2030 is about 79.8 million. And then by 2050, by the time of the completion of the Vision 2050 plan, expected to be greater than 150 million. I think the question is what this means to businesses. Does it mean more prospects in terms of demand or in terms of labor ability? The other key message is really around continued focus of the government towards development of infrastructure projects, which also seem to contribute significantly to the economy. There's also strong focus on industrialization and digitization. I think the question then for businesses and for everyone, I guess, is whether we need to brace ourselves for increased scrutiny by the regulators, given that now all the systems will be integrated. So it means the Revenue Authority will have data that the other regulators also have, and really to prepare for the reviews that will be done by these regulators. The other key message is around the implementation of the cashless economy. As I've said earlier, the minister has made some propositions to this. It appears that it is a welcome measure by the banks and perhaps the telcos, but I think this could perhaps be supplemented or complemented by a review of taxes that are levied on digital transactions to allow the citizens and everybody else and businesses to embrace the digital transactions, and therefore the cashless economy. There is also an expedited strategic focus on the extractive sector. The minister has categorically said they are making strategic moves towards promoting the most productive sectors, one of them being the extractive sector. And we have already seen this translating into the tax changes, as you will see a bit later when my colleague is covering those around reliefs that will be available to the mining companies from July. The Julius Nyerere hydropower project has now been completed and is up and running. I think the question here is whether this will somehow or to a larger extent resolve the power shortage challenges, and therefore support the businesses in their production and operational activities. Tourism sector remains key, and based on the speech, the minister expects that the upcoming AFCON tournament is going to have a significant impact towards promoting this sector in the coming year. What are the lessons that we have learned from this conflict? There's a question of whether countries should now be considering alternative energy sources such as the natural gas or renewable energy. So that is all from me. Thank you very much. Over to you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Fabiola, and also thank you, Samuel. You started by painting a broader picture, a broader perspective, and you laid a strong foundation in terms of what the budget entails. Thank you, Fabiola, for taking us through the global economic outlook and also the Tanzania perspective, the expenditure priorities. So at this moment, I would now like to welcome Sabato Mwaliki, a senior tax manager, to take us through the significant tax changes and reforms. Over to you, Sabato.
Thank you, Jennifer. And to our clients, both existing and prospective, thank you for making time for this briefing. Indeed, as Fabiola said, the measures that have been announced, they are not just incremental. Really, they form part of the broader shift in how, as a country, we intend to mobilize domestic revenue and support the domestic industrialization agenda. My name is Sabato, as I've been introduced, and my task is to digest the tax reforms and to bring in the implications to your business, to your cash flow, to your supply chains, to your pricing, and on your investment decisions over the next 1 year. So the aim is not to repeat the speech, but rather to discuss or pinpoint a few practical implications. I will start with the tax administration, and what we see from the tax administration perspective is the government moving from manual systems, the government going digital, moving from manual transaction by transaction control to a more data-driven, system-based oversight. And what that means then, the government is moving into integrating data with registries and licensing systems. That means then your profile can be cross-checked against business registration, against industry license, and even from real estate perspective. And the government intends to roll out a mobile sort of EFD, an EFD equivalent application. And that is a good move to lower the barrier of the entry for formalization of businesses. It also means TRI can then reach micro and informal traders much more easily. And on these measures, in my view, once these have been implemented, the information asymmetry will be reduced. And that the assumption is it has to be that if it is recorded somewhere in the government system, then TRI can see it. And then you know what that means from a business perspective. That speaks to the importance of, ensuring your internal data aligned, your GL is aligned to the EFD output, your customs declarations are aligned with the payroll, the compliance, the tax returns. Those are the things that the Revenue Authority has been struggling with during audits, but moving digital is going to probably solve that problem. And so for you as a business, what it means is ensure those information are aligned. The small transactions that you do, those will be recorded and they will come through during an audit. And so you avoid a surprise by getting control. So on digitalization, the government side is matched by changes on how business are expected to transact. And I think Fabiola has also mentioned this. The government intends to progressively move to non-cash channels for specific sectors, starting with transport and more specifically public and private transport operations. The school fees, now there will be a requirement to pay electronically, no cash. The hospitality, the real estate, and some high value commodity trades. Another proposal that we see is to tie business licensing in sectors like mining, livestock, agriculture, timber, and fisheries to having a bank account. So the government intends to make it mandatory to have a bank account before you get registered as a business. So to corporates, that matters because it then compresses the space for off books or cash-based it does compress the space for off-book or cash-based practices along your supply and distribution chain. It will kind of change the data trains, transactions, data that sits in a financial institution and systems, then TRI can access and match against. And I think we have seen that in practice, where now the VAT return will automatically pick your input VAT from transactions that have been done, which you may not have recorded, but the TRI already have details of those transactions. So that's where we are moving as a country, and that's the direction that was given by the Minister of Finance yesterday. So it's a very good move to ensure the government gets its fair share, but it comes with some responsibility for the business community to ensure your information are aligned across. What I have seen in practice is some taxpayers complaining that maybe my EFD is not used by me because there are transactions that I do not recognize. So that is probably going to be a bigger issue, but it's an issue that the Revenue Authority has been taking as a fraud issue, but it's an area that you need to also focus in. As the data environment tightens, the stakes around assessments, collection, tax disputes is also changing. So one of the reform in that area is to ensure, is to actually extend the out-of-court settlement timelines. Currently 60 days, but the proposal is to widen that window a bit to 90 days. Slightly more time to negotiate, but in practice and from my experience, I think it's still short time for complex technical disputes, which requires a number of exchange of correspondences between taxpayers and the Revenue Authority, and some fiscal discussions before you actually conclude and set out of court. Another change is now Commissioner being empowered to dispose goods, and more specifically perishable goods that have been seized. And you will be aware that the Commissioner has the power to seize your goods if he has a reason to believe that you have unpaid tax liabilities, or well, there is a procedure for that. But for perishable goods, seizing doesn't really help because they are perishable in nature. So now the safeguard that is put in place is Commissioner given power to save those. After tax administration, let's now dig into the income tax. The government intends to double the threshold for the presumptive tax regime from 100 million to 200 million. There is also a proposed, sorry, there is also a proposed 1-year tax holiday if you are newly registered presumptive taxpayers. And I want to insist, or rather to emphasize presumptive taxpayers, because according to the income tax, presumptive taxpayers are individuals. So this is an incentive to individuals who are starting business and their turnover is not expected to exceed 200 million in a year. In the speech, the Minister of Finance stated the intention was to, reduce the compliance burden for startups. But you see, startups could be individuals or corporations. But because this incentive is focusing on a presumptive tax regime, then that makes it relevant to individuals rather than corporations. So that is one thing that you need to be aware of to avoid confusion. But we'll see how the finance bill is worded, whether it will be extended to also cover corporations. It's kind of a carrot and stick approach, because you're given an entry incentive, a holiday for 1 year, but then a stronger push to move into the mainstream regime once operations grow. So that is to increase the tax rate from 3.5 to 4.5% once your turnover exceeds 11 million. So you have a holiday on the one side, but on the other side, the moment you move from that holiday, the rate is a bit increased. Another change is to increase the digital service tax from 2% to 3%. The deemed distribution, this is a topic that we extensively discussed last year. There's been a number of consultative meetings and lobbying about it. And last year, when the Finance Act finally came, it was settling at around 30% of whatever is not distributed in 1 year, then it's deemed to be distributed. The proposal this year is to reduce that from 30% to 15%, softens a bit, but does not eliminate the tax cost of not paying out profits. So the deemed distribution rules still apply as a behavioral shaping tool to discourage deliberate retention of profits without clear business purpose. So as a business, maybe the takeaway again, as we said last year, is you do regular review of your capital and dividend policies, ensure that what is retained is aligned with a tangible reinvestment or risk buffer. The question that comes into my mind here is, this proposal says few people be excluded. And these are small entities in the financial sector, the insurance, the entities listed in DSE. But the question is, which is not clear, and I guess it will be clear after we see the Finance Bill or the Finance Act. The question is, are they excluded from a reduced fraction from 30 to 15, or excluded from the deemed distribution altogether? So that is what is not clear from the speech, but we hope that we will get there once we have it as a law, or rather once we see the wording of the law. Another provision is to extend the definition of forest produce so that the 2% single installment tax is applicable on natural varnish and the likes. So that definition is now extended and is impacting operators in the agricultural sector. We see a sectoral elements in the mining sector, and this is repeating across VAT, income tax, and excise duty to recognize the exemptions that have been provided for in the mining framework agreement. And you will recall that for tax exemptions to be honored in the relevant tax laws, there was a third document required from the Ministry of Finance, and is commonly termed as a government notes, so that then the exemption can be honored. And the main question has always been, why would the government enter into an MOU with an investor, and then the MOU provides for exemptions, and then when you go to the TRA do not recognize those exemptions? It's still a fact for several sectors, but it seems for the mining sector, we are getting somewhere. Now, the proposal is to ensure that those exemptions that are in the mining framework agreements are actually honored and sort of honoring the government's commitment for the sector. I hope that will be extended to also cover other sectors that have a framework agreement with the government. But I think we are starting somewhere and we are heading somewhere. Now to VAT. Bigger news is a 30 days statutory payment target for the VAT refund, plus a room for you to charge interest from the TRA. The interest story is not typically new. It is there in the law, but I'm sure if this were a physical event, I would have posed the question of who among you has ever charged interest from the TRA. So that's an implementation issue, but the law is clear that you can charge interest if the refund is delayed. And in this case, it's putting a mandatory requirement for the Revenue Authority to revert to you within 30 days from the date of your application. Now, because it says from the date of application for the refund, the question is, how efficient is it that the 30 days will be enough for the Revenue Authority to verify your refund and make a decision and actually transfer the funds back to you? So those are the questions that still remains, but yes, the proposal is to put a capping in terms of the number of days that the Revenue Authority can take. And so for the business community, that then means be vigilant of your refund claims, proper application, make sure you also apply timely so that you avoid your refund applications being time-barred, and take advantage of the 30 days. That is, if this speech then turns into a law. And the procedure is there will be a Finance Bill, then the Finance Act. Capital goods, initially there was, that deferment was expiring this year, but now the proposal is to make that deferment an ongoing feature, not just a temporary concession. What we also see is a number of sector-specific reliefs from VAT, edible oil produced from local seeds, garments from domestic cotton, machinery for apparel production, and EV charging equipment, aircraft-related items, a number of exemptions. But these reliefs tightly focused around value chains that the government wants to deepen domestically. So there is a good number of exemptions and incentives that have been introduced. And of course, the story is not all new relief. Some exemptions are being withdrawn, or some are being redirected to encourage local value addition. For example, we see that the government intends to remove VAT exemptions on imported fishing nets and instead exempt the raw materials for those fishing nets. So from a policy logic, you can see clearly that the pivot is moving from supporting imported finished goods to supporting inputs for local production. And that speaks to one element in the main theme, local industrialization. So that is to support local production. Maybe the question that we may be still need to go to the drawing board is, do we have enough local production? Because the incentive is to discourage importations and encourage importation. So now, do we have enough, or what else can we do then to ensure that the local industries are capacitated enough to produce what we need? So for the importers of finished goods, that may mean facing sort of a VAT cost shock unless you pass that on to the market, which then makes the product a bit expensive. But for local manufacturers, that is relatively an advantage, assuming other factors like, cost of production, electricity, and the like is also managed. Then that looks like a competitive advantage. For integrated businesses, those who does both import and production and local production, then you may want to reconfigure your mix. Another item now is excise duty. Traditionally, this is known as the tax you pay for making sins, is sin tax. Although now it has extensively moved to even cover important sectors like financial sectors and telecom. But traditionally, this is sin tax. And first, we noticed structural change, an 8-year increase in the excise duty rates, except for petroleum products, just to manage the cost because of what is happening in the Middle East. And you will remember that in 2023, some few years ago, the government introduced a 3-year excise calendar. And the purpose was to ensure that the policies are stable. I mean, there's no changes every year. So this was the 4th year, which means we were expecting the rates to increase this year because there haven't been increments, the annual increments over the past 2-3 years. But now what we see as a proposal is to, yes, increase by 8%, but again, go back to the annual adjustments rather than the 3-year stable calendar. We see a proposal to also adjust this annually at the rate of 2% plus inflation rate. So that is sort of making a U-turn to what to what the situation was back before 2023, but it also leaves a question of whether the proposal to put inflation rate plus 2% from 2027 onwards, whether that would be kind of autopilot project that rates will be just incremented every year automatically without need to debate, or that will go back to the drawing board every year. So that is another question that may still be there. But yes, we are going back to the annual adjustments. And in this case, the adjustment factor will be the inflation rate plus 2%. The implication for the beverages, the tobacco industry, the consumer goods, the telecom, the digital service tax, you now need to plan with these changes built in your annual tax drift, and probably your pricing strategies need to also be forward-looking, not just reactive to budget day, because at least you know what is going to happen next year. If this passes into a law, then it seems like a sure event that next year there will be inflation rate plus 2%. So we also note an expansion of excise duty to the digital economy. So the digital service tax, the VAT, and now excise duty on digital service tax. And because VAT is also applicable on top of excise duty, so the non-residents digital service payers are probably going to experience some pinch, which is again relatively small compared to counterparts that supply to registered businesses, B2B. As I said, the excise duty is sin tax, and so we note an increase in new items being subject to excise duty. And the minister stated the reason as being to curb health issues and behavioral issues that are associated with these supplies. So sectors like cosmetic, beauty products, some vehicles and motorcycles, gambling, some specific consumer goods, different rates introduced for excise duty. We can always discuss the specifics. So we see additional levy on sugar, we see additional levy on higher cigarette duty. We see excise being used to nudge consumption, to target lifestyle-related health costs, and to raise revenue from products seen as less essential. I mean, as not a basic need. That's where, and again, good news to the mining sector, as I said. The mining framework agreement exemptions has been honored. Lastly, on a number of customs duty changes, there is a very good number in terms of customs duty changes. These are actually annexed to the speech to the Minister of Finance, but I will speak of a few of them. The custom processing fee will increase from 0.6 to 1% of the customs value. There is also an introduced industrial development levy and the adjustment. This was actually introduced in 2025, but the adjustment for this year is to exempt importations from EAC partner states. I think these duties or levies are introduced in response to some lobbying with industrial or sector players. So I believe the specific players will understand this better, that if you're importing from across East Africa, we are one customs, we are a single customs territory. And so there wouldn't be customs duties. And so this is also meant to align, but subject to meeting the rules of origin. Another change on the customs is to impose export tax at whatever is higher, between 30% or fixed rate of 200 shillings per kg on waste paper, and also impose export taxes on at the rate of 10% of 200k on some fields under the specific HS codes. So that and a good number of, as I said, changes across EAC. And as I said, we are a single customs territory. And as the minister said, the panel of ministers across East Africa, they sat in Arusha and approved some stays and new rates. This list is very long, but there is an increase by 35 of monumental building stones, at least for 1 year, in order to promote the use of local stones. 10% jute remission from 35 for 1 year on raw materials for aluminium manufacturers. That is intended to lower production costs and the likes. So as I said, there's a very good number of customs changes. We can always discuss the specifics. The last part that I want to close with is stamp duty. Stamp duty has normally been a nominal amount ranging from 0% to 1%. And so there is a proposal to increase the duty rates on bill of sales, on partnership deeds, on checks, on documents to surrender of lease, and the documents transferring agricultural land. The idea is to now move from a fixed rate of TZS 100, which was a nominal amount, to 0.5%. So moving from a fixed rate to ad valorem rate. So overall, the budget has been framed around a clear ambition of building a resilient economy through digital transformation, which is the main theme for the budget, and also through strategic investment in sustainable fiscal policies. The question of sustainable fiscal policies, I will leave it to the panelists to discuss. But from where I am sitting, when I look closely at the proposed tax changes, it looks that the theme is embedded in the design of the reforms. On the digital transformation, for example, the budget pushes the tax system kind of decisively into the digital age. We see, and as I have presented, an expanded use of ICT and data analytics by TRA. We also see a wider deployment of electronic fiscal solutions, now proposing to also come up with mobile applications that can issue electronic fiscal receipts, and a gradual move towards mandatory digital payments in key sectors. That measures really strengthen the integrity of the tax base. They will kind of reduce the informality and create more transparent environment for compliant businesses. But and I want to be clear that for compliant businesses, it's a good thing. But for the non-compliant, then it simply means you will be exposed. So time to rethink. On strategic investment, the tax proposals appear very deliberate, and duty remissions and VAT incentives for priority value chains, we see exemptions on edible oil, on textiles, on garments, on aluminium, on vehicle assembly, sort of encouraging local industries or assembling business in Tanzania, including electric and clean energy infrastructure. Those are coupled with protective tariffs on selected finished imports, but we also see export levies on raw materials, which then discourages exportation of those raw materials and encourage domestic value addition. So in combination, those measures seek to make it more attractive, productive, to have it here locally than to import from finished goods from outside the country, or rather to export raw materials for those goods. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. I wish you a very good morning. Thank you, Jennifer. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Sabato. At this point, people would be giving you a round of applause, and I'm seeing a lot of reactions. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think that was quite a lovely presentation by Sabato, and very detailed. And we should now be moving on to our next very exciting part of the session, which is the panel discussion. And we have a team of 3 very well seasoned professionals, very good at what they do. If you can move to the next slide. Yes, so we have with us on the panel, Mr. Fakihi Fadhili, who is the Director of Finance from Kilombero Sugar Company. And as I call up your names, you will just turn on your camera so that the audience can get a chance of seeing your face and putting a face to the name. We also have Godvictor Limo. Godvictor Limo is a senior manager within the Tax and Dispute Resolution Unit, and he works with GGM. We also have Obinna, who is the Managing Director of Serengeti Breweries Limited. Do we have you on camera? Okay. I see Obinna, I see Fakihi, I also see Godvictor, and we can continue posting those reactions and giving them big round of applause as we get to unpack the budget and the presentations that have been taken through by my colleagues. Thank you so much. All right. So I'll give each one of you a minute to just briefly say hi to the team, and then we will deep dive into our discussion questions. And we will start with Fakihi. You can just come on camera and quickly say hi so that the people can get to see you.
Jennifer, good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending this session. Looking forward for good discussion going forward. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you. Godvictor. Godvictor, if you're speaking, I can't hear you. You're speaking on mute.
Sorry, thank you, Jennifer, and good morning, everyone. I think it's a good morning for everyone, and we are in very high spirit to engage in what has been presented to us in terms of the budget. and looking forward to a very engaging session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and over to you, Obinna.
Let me practice the little Swahili I've picked up. Habari za asubuhi mabibi na mabwana. It's a pleasure to be here to share just a little bit of how I perceive the new budget announcements that were made yesterday. Thanks, Jennifer, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Obinna. And because you're trying to keep up with your Swahili, I would say karibu sana. Okay. So we've seen the budget. We've listened into the presentation by Fabiola on the economy and also Sabato on the key changes. As I was listening to the presentation, to the speech yesterday, I learned that this year's budget sort of marks the foundational year of the execution of the country's Vision 2050. And the budget is really projecting an aggressive push towards self-reliance, towards domestic industrial growth. And we're also foreseeing a significant shift into a digital and cash-light economy. Fabiola mentioned about the budget numbers and the expenditure priorities. So the total budget is at around 62 trillion, which is 74% internally sourced. Somebody could ask then, were we expecting that the government will, tax us more so that they're able to cover that 74% domestically? So it's also something that we will have to discuss. But now I'm going to pose this question to all of you. And then we will start probably with Fakihi, Good Victor, and then finalize with Obinna. So having looked at the budget and listened to the speech, what is your overall impression on the budget? And also, what is your take in terms of the increased focus on domestic revenue mobilization? We'll start with Fakihi.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I would like to call out some few things on what I have seen and which has already been mentioned by our colleague, tax partner Bin Samuel or Fabiola. So basically, when you look at the budget and when you are talking about the 74% domestic revenue expected in FY 26-27, I would like to call it's not something new. It's something that we have achieved over the past 2 years. We have been reaching plus or minus 70% collection in terms of revenue. However, if you look at the key figure, is the growth in terms of the domestic revenue absolute value, moving from 34 trillion shillings to a close of 39 trillion shillings. As a collection, that is plus or minus 15% growth. Thank you for your question. So if you ask me, how do we see it from the industry perspective or from the Mwananchi perspective, I call it a citizen perspective. I'm just looking at the 3 or 4 things that provide a confidence that we should be able, the government should be able to collect that one. I think when you look at the statistic, the growth in private sector, we are talking about double digit, over 20% in terms of growth in private sector. That gives you comfort that there is a potential growth in terms of revenue. If you look at the other key area which the government or the budget speech is highlighting is formalization of the informal sector. I think my colleague has already mentioned about the tax holiday that has been mentioned. So it's quite key that it's all about tax widen base rather than taxing more for those who are already existing in the industry. But I think what is touching me more and I'm passionate about it is about the cashless economy. If you look at what has been mentioned on the budget speech about the focus on the cashless economy, I think it gives a confidence to Mwananchi, including myself, that I think achieving 74% tax revenue is something that is achievable. The last one, which I can even call out, is about the focus on what I call a transformative sectors. If you look at the budget speech, it's clearly talking about those transformative sectors being agricultural or mining or call it extractive sectors. And if you look at the tax reform that has been done or tax changes that have been done in those areas, it gives you confidence that reaching 74% collection in terms of domestic revenue to the budget is something that is achievable. So overall, I'll say that is not is an achievable ambition. Is in line with the GDP growth of 6.3, and as Fabiola mentioned, we are growing rapidly compared to even other SADC or East African community countries. So we're in better position to deliver the budget as it has been presented. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much. So you're saying that we've done it before and surely we can do it again. God, Victor, what's your take on this?
Yeah, no, thank you, Jennifer. So in terms of impression, actually, I would say, this year's budget, the 2026-2027 budget, it's the inaugural budget under the Tanzania Development Vision 2050, the DIRA 2050, as you're all aware. And it is also the fourth national 5-year development plan budget. So I see the government being at the center stage at the moment to embrace digital transformation in enhancing tax collection, expanding the tax base, but also increasing efficiency. So in terms of revenue mobilization and the domestic revenue collection, I think what the government has realized is that there's a lot of leakages. And I think there's an opportunity by integrating technology into the administration of the TRA to be able to expand the collections. That's as a first thing. So I think the government at the moment is trying to build a fully digitized revenue and compliance ecosystem, which is what we need to attain the 2050 vision goals as an economy. But also you would have realized that the government has gone further and to recognize the startups. So by according them, a 12-month tax holiday, I think this is a great incentive which is geared towards building a robust economy and widening tax base, but also creating, employment for a lot of youth Tanzanians who are graduating. So this year's budget, actually, I would say it's more focused on digitization and, maximizing or optimizing collection through digitization, through the use of, AI and the big data analysis. Thank you.
All right. And Obina?
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. I think my co-panelists have done a good job of just laying out their perspective on what this budget means. I like to look at things like this from even just the theme of the budget. So if you think about how it was worded, it says the intention is to build economic resilience. If I think about everything happening geopolitically around the world, it is absolutely the right thing to do. There's all kinds of shocks coming through from the war in the Middle East, or even the sustained, crisis between Russia, and Ukraine. So how governments strive to build economic resilience will be critical in the short term. And they've articulated 3 ways they want to do it. So the first thing they've prioritized, and I think even the ordering of the things in the theme was quite deliberate in my view. So digital transformation, this is absolutely important. Now, if you think about the long-term impact of widening the tax base through digital transformation, then you begin to see potentially how all of this will play out in the future. Perhaps not so much in this first year, but in terms of the long-term sustainable pathway towards mobilizing more revenue domestically, digital transformation will play a key role there. And then they said strategic investment. So the first thing was digital transformation. The second thing was strategic investment. And we know, all the key strategic investments that would really unlock industrial and economic capabilities for Tanzania, whether it's the gas projects, or whether it's, the investments in the SGR and Tazara to optimize logistics, or whether it's all the stuff happening in, solid minerals, which the government has clearly itemized. I think all of those, even if they don't pay off in the first year, but the fact that there will be demonstrable progress in those areas will ensure that DIRA 2050 will get off on a very fast start. And then the last thing they talked about was fiscal sustainability. This is where I've got some concerns, and I think as we get on with the conversation, we can touch some of the fiscal interventions that they've put in place in this year's budget, and whether those are really sustainable or whether they can become counterproductive or have unintended consequences on the growth that the government is projecting, because you need a viable private sector to drive the type of growth that the government needs. 6.3% GDP growth rate, I believe, is achievable, but the fiscal policies will need to support that. And then the last piece is really, why are they doing this? And it says they are doing it for inclusive growth. And this is important because, one of the biggest challenges that I think about is, the impact on disposable income. So when my business, basically our consumers, the bulk of them are average Tanzanians. And the more you squeeze disposable income, the more their purchasing power reduces and their inability to participate in the formal sectors of the economy reduces. And therefore, that will also have an impact on collection. So inclusive growth is absolutely the right way to go. I'm just seeing some challenges or some concerns in terms of the impact of some of the fiscal policies and whether that will support the inclusive growth that the budget wants to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you, Obi. Thank you, Fakihi, and good Victor. I think that was quite insightful. And for the audience, I would really urge you to participate. You can use the chat functionality, and Sabato, Mwaliki, and team will be going through the chats. And at some point, when we get to the Q&A session, you can request to be unmuted if you would like to speak and participate more on the discussion. So yeah, from that first questions, I've gathered quite a few points. One is that the budget is achievable. The 74% domestic financing is achievable, but we still need to have like a strong, effective and efficient tax administrative system. The tax base needs to be widened and has been widened, and we also need to have like supporting fiscal policies to ensure that in the long term all this is achieved. And the good thing is that the budget is that we are looking at Vision 2050, so there's time for us to like take the initiatives and put policies in place to ensure that the digital economy that we are trying to be as a country is actually achieved. So we will move now to the next question. As Fabiola was doing her presentation, she mentioned agriculture to be one of the sectors contributing significantly to the Tanzania economy. And I will pose this question to Fakihi. So how does this year's budget then support the agricultural sector? The sector being a priority and heavily contributing to the economy. And what further reforms do you think will be needed to ensure that locally produced products remain competitive against the imports? Over to you, Fakihi.
Thank you, Jennifer, and that's a very good question. So if you reflect on what has been presented on the budget yesterday, in conjunction with what has been presented by the Minister of Agriculture in terms of agriculture budget, I think there is a clear intention from the government that they are trying to transform the agricultural sector. And if you look at even the allocation in terms of the budget that has been allocated in the agricultural sector, for the 26-27 year, you will see that it's a clear intention for the government that they recognize agriculture is contributing close to 23-24% of the GDP of the country. I would like to call some few things which I like to say positive things that has been introduced during the budget speech, which is clearly focusing on agricultural sector. We have seen in the presentation which has been done by Sabato as well on the budget speech, there has been quite a significant shift on increase on taxes, duties, and some levies, especially for the imports coming into the country, for the good intention of the government that is to protecting the industries that's within the country, which are mostly using the locally produced input to produce the products. I'll just call out few. If you look at the emphasis which has been put on the edible oil industries, talking about the VAT exemption that has been put on the edible oil industry, motivating or incentivize producers of the oil seeds in the country. You can see clearly that the government is in that direction. If you look at another aspect, which I think for me is more important, especially when you mention about agriculture, you're looking for the structural changes like the VAT deferment of the capital goods. I think we know that it has been proposed to remove the sunset clause. So basically, for the agriculture to transform, you do expect that you will still have to import some of the capital goods. And I think this was the end year where it was supposed to be removed. But I think continuation that shows that there is a good intention of moving that sector forward. I think one of the things that I would like to see, and I think you haven't seen it much, although the government has done a good job going forward, is all about the harmonization of the fees. I call them fees, levies, and penalties across the industry. It's unfortunate that agriculture is a value chain. It starts from the farmer all the way to the manufacturing. So if you look at the number of the fees and the charges in levy that has been introduced, not necessarily on this budget, but more increased in this budget, it has got a multiple effects on the growth in terms of agriculture. I'd like to call just few to mention. There has been a very good intention from the government in terms of introduction of 10 shillings per 1 kg of sugar as a sugar levy. If you hear 10 shillings, it may sound very low, but actually we are talking about 10,000 per ton of sugar that is producing. This is over on top of the existing one, which is 50 shillings already, which was introduced 2 years down the line. So what does it mean? We all know that we are living in a world whereby the cost of input are increasing significantly. By increasing of these levies, it means now you are even eroding the margin and you are reducing incentivize in terms of investment on agriculture. So I think for me, what I will appreciate to see it going forward is how do we make sure that this institution or these regulators that are introducing fees, although it's for the good intention, like this one is for the universal health program, but we need to make sure that we don't discourage the agricultural sector in terms of growth, looking at its importance. So I think to summarize, I'll say that the government also have looked at one of the key things, which is climate change, in terms of how can we be resilient in terms of climatic change. That is, I think, is the norm nowadays in terms of quality El Nino, and the likes that is going on. I've seen the government putting a lot of effort in terms of their budget by increasing the budget on irrigation, national irrigation program, which I think is the way to go, because with the climate change, there is no stop anywhere that will say now there will be no longer in terms of the change of the climate. So I think the government is putting the right effort and they are deliberate in making sure that we don't only depend on the rain-fed agriculture, but we more depend on also the irrigation, which is a sustainable agriculture. Jennifer, what I can say, I think there has been a good emphasis and a good effort for the government in terms of agricultural sector, but more work needs to be done, especially on reducing these fees and taxes which are duplicate throughout the value chain. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Over to you.
Thank you, Fakihi. I think that was elaborate and very well articulated. And we'll now probably move to Good Victor with your mining sector experience. Mining sector is also among the priority sectors and a key driver of the economy. So which one of the proposed measures do you think would significantly impact the mining sector, given your overall experience in that sector?
Yeah, no, thank you, Jennifer. I think there are a couple of proposed changes that will impact the sector, I would say, positively. And I must say that the government is gearing towards the right direction, having identified that the mining sector plays a key role in the GDP contribution. You would have seen the numbers have been increasing in terms of the contribution, basically being driven by the price of the commodities, but also the volume that is currently being produced. But one of the key features is streamlining of the framework agreements with the tax exemptions, which will now be recognized based on the cabinet approval. And this will remove the hassle of getting, government notices. Prior to that, with respect, regardless of whether you had the framework agreements or any stability agreements, you still had to get into fights with, the revenue authority to be able to enforce, some of the concessions that have been granted to you as a company or as an entity. But now with this new proposal, where it looks like there will be an automatic recognition, we hope this will restore the investor confidence, and it will make a business smooth in terms of operation going forward. So we look forward into how it's going to be implemented, but definitely this will simplify the process for companies, and which is what we all want to look to. It's all what we want to see. Of course, there is one challenge, because as you have realized in the market, there are companies which already had framework agreements even prior to the tabling of this yesterday's budget. So the question would be, would those companies that had entered into framework agreements with the government prior to this budget presentation, will they still be, receiving that automatic recognition of the concessions embedded in their framework agreements? That is a question that we'll have to be discussing, but hopefully that will be the way, because that's the only way you're going to be unlocking, the huge potential that we have in the mineral sector. But the other thing I think that came into it, which I spotted, is actually the government drive to strengthen, research and investment in the mining sector. And there's a proposal to set aside 10% of the gross mineral collections by the ministry responsible for minerals, that's Ministry of Minerals, and this will be set aside as a fund that will be used for research. Now, you must have seen all these big mining companies that we have in the country, the ones that are already in operations and all those that are still in situ to be opened or to be launched. There has to be exploration and research prior to us being able to see a big mine in place. And that is the piece that we have been missing. Without research, without exploration in the mineral sector, you don't expect, to have big mines or even relative medium scale mine, even the small mines. Now, as you know, in the mining sector, every mine has got a life. There is a life of mine. So you would expect at a certain stage, a certain mine would still have to undergo a closure. So by the time it's going closure, you need to have other mines in the process that are coming into play. And the only way you can have them in place is to make sure that you invest in research, you invest in exploration, and that's what you need to be putting more energy on. And I think the budget has addressed that, and the government is doing the right thing towards, getting us and making sure that we have a sustainable mineral sector that will see us for the foreseeable future and beyond our vision 2050. But the other issue which came up in the budget, which is very supportive, is the withdrawal of the sunset clause on the VAT deferment. Mining sector is a very capital intensive sector with a lot of high level equipment, expensive equipment. So the VAT deferment has been one of the key factors that has been helping in reducing the cash flow constraints for the mines, which is a very good thing. So I think this is a good move that will help the mining sector grow and also be able to reinvest their surpluses in exploration and in opening up new mines. The other issue I think which is key and which is about to actually mention is the issue of the VAT refunds. The VAT refunds, as much as the clause has been there, but you would have seen in the budget, there's a streamlining of the VAT refunds also to the framework agreements. And one of the biggest issues has been on the intending traders or the mines that are under rehabilitation. So for the intending traders, what we've been seeing is they have at some point been denied the VAT refunds. And also they faced a risk of being deregistered at some point. Because you have to specify a certain limit, and when it lapses, then you face a risk of being deregistered and losing all your input or your VAT refunds that would have been entitled to you. So with this alignment to the framework agreement, we think this one will be strengthened, and companies now will have the confidence in being able to get back, the refunds, but also on the companies that are doing rehabilitation or under closure and they don't have any taxable, supplies at the point of, closure, they'll still be able to access refund, which is a good thing. It puts confidence to the investor, but it encourages more investment into the sector. Thank you, Jennifer.
Okay, and so if you were to recommend policy adjustments before the budget is actually implemented, what would it be? Or do you feel like everything is okay as it is?
No, thank you, Jennifer. Actually, there are a number that I would have recommended. And one of the key recommendations that I would have put forward is a change in control clause, Section 56 of the Income Tax Act. It has significantly and negatively affected investment in the mining sector. And you would think, I think the current exemption that is provided under the Income Tax Act is actually very narrow. As they only recognize share allotments at the Tanzanian entity level and transfer between resident persons. It's limited to only resident persons. So this excludes most capital raising structures where shares, are being issued at the offshore level, which is common, in the capital intensive exploration projects. So this has actually an intentionally triggered change in control tax consequences, and it has discouraged reinvestment. As I said, mining is a capital intensive, business. You need a lot of capital. And most of this capital is raised in capital markets. And most of these capital markets are actually outside the country. So this is a frequent sort of occurrence where you have a lot of shares moving and capital coming into the projects. Now, by having, this restriction under Section 56, where the change in control is triggered, then you end up taxing capital, which is actually not something recommendable. And you don't see anywhere in the world people taxing capital. But the way the Section 50 has been structured, it unintentionally, ends up, taxing equity where you get offshore funding. So one of the proposed, solution to this, if you ask me, would be to expand the exemption to include offshore share issuances that will indirectly alter ownership in a Tanzanian entity, but also exclude the pre-production extractive companies, that is the exploration companies, from the scope of Section 56. I think this will unlock, a lot of potential. I think you must have heard about the Kabanga Nickel, the big projects that are in the pipeline. They all need funding, and most of this funding is from the private sector, and it is raised through the capital markets. So unless we put up, provisions that are enabling for people to raise funds easily and cheaply, we might not be able to get, the seed fund or the seed capital to bring these projects into life. The other thing that I would have proposed is the tax deduction on mineral royalty. The current non-deductibility of royalty, despite it being a mandatory statutory, payment, it has materially increased costs but also reduced the project viability. We have projects that have got marginal odds, and where the profitability level is very small. And you want these projects also to become on board, especially with these good prices in the commodity prices in the market. How are you able to bring them into life? One is to make sure that you minimize the cost of production. And one of the things is like allowing this royalty deduction. But we are the only country, if you look at the SADC countries, that are not allowing royalty as a deductibility, as a deduction. If you look at Zambia, if you look at Ghana, South Africa, Namibia, all these countries, they allow royalty as a deduction. It's only in Tanzania. And this has actually made, cost of doing business, very expensive. And you would wonder, with all the potential we have in the sector, but we still have very few players. So I think this is an area that I would have recommended the government to look seriously in to be able to unlock the potential that we are sitting with, in the country. With mining, once you unlock the potential, you touch more than 11 people. And one person in the mining sector has got more than 11 or 12 people behind. So the value chain, if you look at it in terms of scale, is huge. And the economic impact is similarly, huge. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, good Victor. So we started with agriculture, we moved to mining. Let's now look at manufacturing. And Obi, you're an expert in the manufacturing industry. So if you remember, in 2023, the excise law was amended to fix the excise duty rates for a period of 3 years. And this was towards promoting a policy predictability. But in yesterday's budget speech, there was a different proposal where the budget proposed to depart from that 2023 amendment and now start to apply new changes on the excise duty specifically for non-petroleum products. So there's an 8% increase in excise duty for the current year, with a subsequent annual inflationary increase plus a 2% there. So Obi, from your perspective, what are your thoughts on this proposed change, and how will it impact the manufacturers of excisable goods like yourselves, the likes of SBL?
Thanks a lot, Jennifer. I believe it was your colleague, I think Sabato, who said we call it the sin tax. For us, we advocate for responsible drinking excessively, so that's what we do. We constantly preach responsible drinking. Therefore, I don't think it's a sin tax, but that's just on the side. Just if I to address your question directly, I would like to start first by commending the government for what they did in 2023. The challenges we faced in the past has always been the unpredictability of excise movements and changes. Therefore, companies can't plan. You don't know what to expect. You don't know whether there'll be an excise change this year or not. And imagine if you're an organization, you've set your strategic goals, you've aligned targets, the shape of your P&L, your capital structure, and then all of a sudden this thing hits you. It just basically makes a mockery of the entire process. Therefore, the government's move in 2023 to bring about some level of predictability was really something that we all welcomed. I mean, SBL, certainly, we welcomed that. I guess the challenge with this move from the government, the logic is clear. What they're trying to avoid is very high impact distortions by having, one lump sum movement in excise changes. Obviously, even when you look at the data, you see the impact on the industry is quite significant because, no one can absorb those kind of increases. And therefore, what happens is, prices go up because, organizations need to protect margins within reasonable ranges. Prices go up. When prices go up, consumers already have a lot of pressure on disposable income. Therefore, consumption patterns will change. They don't necessarily stop consuming. They only just move into the informal sector, which is what then fuels the illicit alcohol trade. From a research that was done by Euromonitor, which was published earlier in the year, what was clear is that Tanzania loses 1 trillion Tanzanian shillings estimated from illicit alcohol. When you look at all the total taxes that the government collects from the alcoholic beverages sector in a year, it's about 1 trillion as well. So what the government collects from the formal sector, they're invariably also losing to the informal sector due to illicit alcohol. So if I go back to the point about the new structure, an 8% in year one and an inflation plus 2% in subsequent years, I've got some concerns there. I think the first thing is to acknowledge the fact that last year, or the last time we had an excise adjustment in 2023, it was a 20% increase. So the fact that the government listened to, some of the inputs that we made as stakeholders in the progress and industrialization of Tanzania, they listened to us and moderated, the increments. That's quite commendable. However, we still believe that there's still room to adjust a little bit more. An 8% increase in year one. And if you think about the current inflationary trend, it's roughly somewhere between 3 to 4%. So if you add a 2% on that, it's 6%. So 6% next year, 6% the following year. If you add those two sixes, that's 12. If you add this year's 8, it's 20. So the same 20% we got 3 years ago, which the industry suffered from, it's sort of by and large the same 20% we're facing, albeit in a phased manner. I think that's quite steep for the industry, and it would really impact pricing decisions. And when that happens, the market would suffer a bit because volumes will soften, and then the government also would not collect the excise that they are projecting. What I would rather advocate for is, that the government reconsiders, and what the industry proposed was a low single-digit increase, and honestly, that will still be kind of like what we'll continue to advocate for, and hopefully, the government, over the next couple of weeks, would look at it and work with us to see how to make that possible. And then when you look at the outer years, you see one of the reasons why in most countries or in some other jurisdictions, excise is pegged to inflation is because it is supposed to help retain value. So whatever value in revenue terms that you lose due to inflation, excise helps you recover that value, not to help you get more than the value you have lost. So if inflation is between 3 to 5%, which is the projection in the budget for the next couple of years, it would really be more beneficial to the industry if the government also pegs the outer years excise movements to inflation. I think that will really support industrialization. That will really support the sustainability of the industry, and also would help minimize the growth rate of the illicit trade of alcohol, because whenever prices move, it's not necessarily that people stop drinking, they just move to informal alcohol. And at that point, the excise collection will invariably be lost. So really want to once again thank the government for what they've done in the past 3 years, where we saw some stability. Acknowledge the fact that they've listened to us and have moderated the increases this year, but still pushing that they review this downwards and land at a place that is a bit more comfortable for the industry, to support the growth in the industry and also support tax collection from the government. So a low single digit type of excise increase would be more beneficial to the industry, in my view, than the current 8% that has been advocated. Thank you.
Thank you, Obi. Yeah, I think that was clear. And I think from the issue of predictability, in my perspective, I would think that the policy still creates some sort of, predictability, because you already know how much the increase will be. And so you probably, I don't know, price accordingly. But I also hear you that if you sum that up, it's a massive increase.
And you see,
Yeah.
the one thing just to add, and thanks for bringing up perspective. So the one thing to add, yes, there's some bit of predictability in the outer years. I just think it's in the magnitude of that predictable impact and the cumulative effect of it. The one thing that we should also bear in mind is, you see, the sugar, I believe that one of my co-panelists spoke about the 10 shillings increment will impact, most of us in the industry. There's a change as well in the customs processing fee from 0.6% to 1%. That is a whopping 67% increase. It's going to impact all manufacturers. So when you add all of that, and then there is also the 1% withholding tax on food produce. And if you think about a lot of the inputs that goes into the manufacturing of alcoholic beverages, they are all agricultural crops. So just when you think about the cumulative effect of all of this, because it's not just the excise bit, but when you look at the cumulative effect to the industry, I think it's quite a lot. And the impact, I don't think there's any company that would be able to absorb all of this and hold prices. There will be price movements if this remains this way, and that will impact the market, unfortunately.
Okay, I hear you. And so, Obina, you have drawn experience from a number of jurisdictions, and based on that experience, what changes would you then recommend as far as policy formulation process is concerned? If you borrow from all your experience.
Yeah, so again, look, I've been in Tanzania for 3 years, and every single year there has been improvements in terms of the engagement with private sector and just ensuring that we have a voice in the process. I have to commend, the Ministry of Finance, and also the Parliament, the Budget Committee of the Parliament, because through the auspices of the Confederation of Tanzania Industries, they ensure that stakeholders, are carried along. Having said that, there's a saying that the biggest room in the world is the room for improvement, because there's always room for improvement, right? To make this process a bit more progressive and a bit more inclusive, I think it might help if we have defined engagement periods way ahead. You see, perhaps 3 months before even the announcements, that there's clarity on the policy direction of the budget, so that real interventions and conversations can happen between stakeholders and the government. And hopefully the government also would respond with clarity as to, why, inputs that were made were carried or not carried. That way, it just ensures that, the voice of the industry is really heard and the industry is really carried along. And then if you think about the time frame between when the budget is read to when the implementation begins. So effectively, between now and the 1st of July, it's just a couple of days. It's like between less than 3 weeks. Therefore, even there isn't any opportunity for between when, the budget is first read and, when the bill becomes an act of parliament. And therefore, doesn't give stakeholders enough time to engage and for robust processes to be put in place. If you think about some of the changes sometimes that are triggered by, fiscal policy changes, a case in point would be the digitization move. There's still a lot to understand in terms of how this will be done. So hopefully when we see the finance bill, we will understand it in more detail. But if the expectation is that from 1st of July, that this would become, the approach, then I don't think most businesses will be ready to onboard that, and therefore leave some room, particularly when it's time for audits, and then there's a case of non-compliance, which then becomes another issue altogether as well. So how my suggestion would be just creating some room for more robust engagement between the government and the private sector before the budget announcement is made, and also some room between when the budget announcement is made and the implementation date, so that any surprises in there can really be ironed out. And perhaps what might help is if maybe Ministry of Finance can set up almost like a permanent excise working group, like a standing excise working group that doesn't just meet during the budget cycle, but all year round. There's regular meetings with different industry stakeholders, so that we are all just reviewing stuff and understanding how even the current fiscal policies or interventions that have been made, in the budget, how they are working, and therefore whether there's any room, to tweak and to adjust even whilst we're in motion. So those would be some of the few suggestions I would make in terms of, how to kind of strengthen the engagement with private sector during the budget cycle. Thanks, Jennifer.
Yeah. So I also feel like the time available for stakeholder engagements is not enough. Yeah. Maybe before we move on, any additions from Fakihi or God Victor to that very same questions in terms of your recommendations as far as policy formulation process is concerned? If you have any burning comments. Fakihi?
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. I think one of the burning one is the government has got an intention. If you look at the 2030 vision and the 2050 vision of the government, is self-sufficient in terms of the sugar into the country. However, I think Obina mentioned it clearly. The engagement should be ongoing to make sure that that is achieved. Because when the fees and taxes are increased, it's unfortunate that you cannot be able to pass all over to customer and still get a growth in terms of the expected in the industry. So I think for me, the emphasis on that one in terms of policy, because we can't single out one or two, there are too many of them. It's more engagement with the government, and government should be able to listen. I like Obina's comments to say that at least if the government is able to come back to us to say the industry proposed changes on the budget has not been considered because of A, B, and C, it will have be more productive. And the way to go, the way forward will be able to have a way forward on how to deal on those changes. I think that's the only thing that I can call out. Thank you.
Thank you. Good, Victor, anything to add?
Yeah, I think I want to, concur with Obina in terms of, certainty. Of course, with the excise duty, there's an element of inflationary adjustment. Of course, that is necessary. But over and above that, I think there's an issue of, letting or keeping the industry competitive. That's number one. And the only way you do that is to make sure that you manage, these increases to a level that the businesses can accommodate, but also the market can accommodate. So that is very key in making sure that you get the sustainability. But one of the key issues, again, I think which I see is the issue on the health. Obina has talked about the illicit brew, and maybe one of the things he has not touched is on the health bill. because as much as there could be some revenues that are coming from the illicit brew, I think on the other side, there's a hand taking that revenue away even more than what is being collected through the health bills. We have seen where we live in the societies around us, communities, the level of impact, from the illicit brew that Obina has just talked about here. So I think you need to rationalize that. And I would say from a policy perspective, if there would be a way to discourage, these illicit brews, then that will not only be good to the society in terms of the health, but also be good for, the big champions in the market that advocate for the right quality of brew that, is available in the market. Thank you, Jennifer.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So maybe I'll pose the next question to yourself, with Victor. The country is currently looking at embracing and promoting local content, and especially their participation in the supply chain. So to what extent does the budget address the skills and technology requirements that are necessary to meet the needs, especially the needs of the extractive sector?
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. And I think one, I recommend the government and actually the Ministry of Minerals. They've been on a trajectory that has been very helpful. And one of the things, if you've been following up year-on-year basis, they have been trying to unbundle the supply chain, the complicated supply chain of the extractive sector, and especially with the big multinational companies. And last year, you would have noted they actually were very specific. They came up a list, I think, of 20 items, goods and services that can only be supplied or sold by Tanzanian entities, 100% owned Tanzanian entities. I think it's a good drive towards local content. But over and above that, there is, a requirement to have the local shareholding for companies that are coming to invest and intend, to supply to the mining companies, which is also a big, move in terms of ensuring that there's one, beneficiation, but two, economic benefits to the locals and to the country in general. But three, also, it ensures that most of the money is actually left in country. But this year budget and what was presented yesterday by the minister, one of the striking feature that was, supporting the local content is, for example, the imposition of the 10% export tax, or the 200 shillings per kilogram, whichever is higher, on minerals like quartz and feldspar. These are very key minerals in the marble industry and in the glass industry. So by putting this measure, it means we are moving, and the government is moving and discouraging exportation of raw minerals, and it is pushing for, beneficiation in country. So our manufacturers locally should be able now to get, sufficient raw materials to be able to, process the raw minerals and increase the local content aspect. So this is a good thing because, as you know, the mining sector, like I said, it remains a priority sector and a driver for the GDP, and export. So with the explicit intent, to move from raw material extraction to the downstream processing and other value-adding, industries that will come on board, it's a good drive to make sure that, we increase that economic contribution and the GDP contribution from the sector to the government, but also widen tax base, number one, but also increase, the tax contributions to the country. So I think it's a good move, and I think with the local content, that's where we see the real value of the sector. So any efforts by government to, increase processing, you would have seen Dodoma now is becoming a hub for mineral processing, actually even gold refining now. We've got a number of refineries, gold refineries in the country, one sitting in Geita, Mwanza, Dodoma. So all these are big, and there's another one that's going to be in Buzwagi for some of these minerals, the mineral concentrates. So we are seeing a lot of local content efforts being done by the government. And this year's budget, I think it sets the keynote to making sure that we are able to get more value from our resources. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, good Victor. I think that was elaborate enough. I was going through the Q&A. I'm only seeing 2 questions, so I encourage you to participate. Just post your questions, and then after we finish with the panel discussion, we will have our partners respond to your Q&A, to the questions before we close. Okay. Can probably move to the next discussion question, and I'm going to pose this question to Fakihi. So with the global supply chain pressures and fluctuating fuel prices, which we've all seen, the manufacturing sector is likely to face increased operational costs. And I know, Fakihi, you're also an expert in the manufacturing sector. So do you believe that the sector could benefit from a reduction in levies and taxes that are applicable to petroleum products? And this is as far as production and operational costs are concerned.
Thank you, Jennifer. I think just general, first of all, we Tanzania are part of the global economy, and unfortunately, the impacts of geopolitical is also impacting Tanzania economy in one way or another. And I think you'll agree with me that we are operating in what I call VUCA, volatile, uncertain, and complex, ambiguous environment, to the extent that nothing is certain and everything is complex, if not ambiguous, and it's important, and if it's not volatile. One of all is that as the government of Tanzania or as a nation, we have gone through this turbulence before, starting from COVID-19 in Russia and Ukraine, the tariff dispute that has happened between the US and the other major economy like China, which has got an impact to us. And here we are today, where we are talking about US and Iran war, or call it Middle East crisis. So we have gone through those turbulence, and I think our economy has managed to absorb those shocks, I can say in that way. But in this one, I think the current one that we are talking, and the question that I'll pose in terms of the fuel price, I think it's big. I just want to call out that if the fuel price increase, it has got all other associated products that comes with the fuel price is also increasing at the same or similar rate. If you look at the statistic or the budget speech, the fuel price has gone up to a range of 41% to 49% in the month of April and May alone. But one thing that is not being called out, highlighted enough, the fertilizer price has gone up by 46%, because this is has got a link between the fuel and the fertilizer price. And the logistic, which is a supply chain as well, it has gone to the average of plus or minus 33%, especially when you look into the impact of the fuel. So while I commend 100% the government effort to reduce the impact in terms of the, I call it global supply chain pressure, by not increasing any excise duty on a petroleum product. However, that's just a small drop into the big issue that we have in terms of the cost increase. So if you remove what we call not increasing excise duty on petroleum products, yes, thank you so much. But still, I think the impact that is remaining is significantly higher. What is missing, I think, from the budget speech, not highlighted, is the impact of the fertilizer and the agricultural inputs, or the like herbicide, like fertilizer, which are linked with the product. How are they going to be subsidized? Because clearly, if I bring our experience from the agro-manufacturing industry where I operate now, the increase in fertilizer and the other associated petroleum product price increase, which is called, or which is including lubricants and oil, it has increased our price to our cost of production to a range of 10 to 17% as an industry. So if you ask me, are we going to be able to pass that 17% increase in terms of cost production into consumer? I think it's the same thing that Obin has just mentioned. You just need also to look at the citizen or the consumer, that their income has not increased to the level of the cost pressure that we are getting in. So if I say the initiative or the effort for the government to reduce the taxes and levies on petroleum product is welcoming into the industry. However, this one is not expected to reduce the pressure in terms of the magnitude. As I said, we are talking about 10 to 17% increase on the cost of production. And without even taking into account some of the taxes that has been mentioned this morning or that was presented in the budget yesterday, things like the levy that we have mentioned. So even the price will, the cost of production will increase more. So I think to summarize, Jennifer, I'll just say, yes, it will benefit, but the reduction is not significant enough to move the needle, taking into account the impact that has already happened. In closing remarks on the same item, I commend the government in terms of the fuel subsidy that they introduced in April and May, which is close plus or minus 500 shillings per litre. If you want to look at the impact of it, if you could have more 500 per litre, I think we are talking about another addition 2 to 3% increase in cost of production for most of the manufacturing industry. So I think it's to commend that the government has tried their best in terms of reducing the impact, but unfortunately that impact still is bigger, and the most of manufacturing business now will find a way to push that impact to the consumer, and they say the consumer income unfortunately has not increased relative to the increase on the cost that has gone up. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much. I think we've had rich and quite insightful discussions today. And I'm looking at my time, we should start finalizing our panel discussion. And before we wind up or before we wrap up, I would like to invite each of you, and we will start with Fakihi, with Victor, and then finalize with Obi. So what would be your final thoughts on the budget? What do you see as the most important impact or a key takeaway for the audience to go away with? We'll start with Fakihi.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. I think the key takeaway for me, if I can summarize, is in 1 or 2 sentences. We need to prepare ourselves for the digital economy. I think we are going through a digitalization, and each organization need to equip itself to make sure that they can adapt with the changes in terms of digital economy, to the extent that you are able to digitalize most of your process. And when I talk about process, it's not about P&L or balance sheet, it's the whole process of value chain, because as you can see now, the budget speech is clearly now targeting to expand the tax base in terms of the supply chain. So it's important, I think, if you recall, Sabato mentioned that you may find that there are transactions that you have done, but maybe you haven't recorded, but through the tax base in terms of the digital, you'll find that it will be sitting on your TIN number. So I think for me, my call or my recommendation to most of the organization is we need to think differently in terms of how we implement our digital strategy in our supply chain process, so that it will help us with the compliance, but also in terms of certainty on the tax going forward that will be able to pay. Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Thank you. I'm good. Victor, your final thoughts?
Yeah, I think my final thoughts, one, is the pivotal role that the private sector plays into making sure that the government achieves whatever it has presented in terms of the budget. And my recommendation would be, as a government, we should embrace, government and business, we must embrace the PPP, the public-private partnership, in trying to, harmonize and, move towards together achieving the 2050 vision. I think private sector remains a plays a pivotal role in making sure that all these projections that have been put forward by the government, are achieved, number one. But number two is that we as taxpayers, we must start thinking differently, with the government embracing technology, artificial intelligence, and the big data analysis. Then it's not business as usual. We must put our records clear and be ready, for more detailed audits and queries. So we need to be able to embrace that and make sure that we reconsider how we do things and change and embrace technology as well as part of our daily business operation. Thank you.
And Obi?
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. Look, for me, this is the first budget under DERA 2050, and it's really delightful to see how the government strategically is walking the talk. This budget clearly demonstrates that they've thought through the process and are aligning some of the policies behind the key interventions outlined in DERA 2050, which for me is great because then it demonstrates that they're actually walking the talk. Having said that, I would just like to ask that they consider the pressure that the industries are already facing, the manufacturers are facing. We fully appreciate what the government is doing, whether it's in terms of, subsidies on petrol and so on. But, companies are already taking a huge cost increase in terms of inputs. And therefore, any significantly adverse, fiscal intervention that increases their cost base will just trigger a price increase. And once that happens, consumers are already under pressure. So the Mwananchis, when you think about their disposable income, it's really low. And any additional cost increases would further exacerbate and put more pressure on an already stretched disposable income. And that would then lead to, lower volumes, which would impact government collection. And particularly in our industry, it's not necessarily that people will stop consuming. They just move into the informal sector, which then, further worsens the illicit alcohol trade. And the government does not generate any revenues from that. So it's really important that they try to strike a balance. I know it's tough. I know, I don't envy the guys at the, at the Ministry of Finance, who are trying to really square these things out, particularly when you think about the fact that, the multilateral, donors and governments are no longer, doling out, the kind of funds they used to do in the past. So the government needs to find a way to stay self-sufficient. So it's really tough, but let's not sacrifice long-term sustainable growth for very short-term, revenue mobilization. I think that's where I would like to end this, because I think that's the real crux of the matter. How do you guarantee long-term sustainable growth, not just for the government, but also for the private sector? Because the private sector will drive the economy. Whilst, having a balanced approach to revenue mobilization. I feel like right now, there seems to be a significant, the scale is tilted in the balance of immediate revenue mobilization, which is understandable, but might derail the longer term benefits. Thanks.
All right, so thank you, Obi. Thank you, Fakihi. Good, Victor. It was a lovely discussion. I feel like the cake is made and it has already been iced, and I wouldn't want to add anything on top of that. So I would really want to sincerely thank you for sharing with us your experiences and expertise. And I believe that the audience enjoyed the discussion. At this point, if there's anyone on the call that would want to ask a question, you can raise your hand and we can have your mic unmuted, and then you will have a right to speak. In the meanwhile, I'm going to read the questions that have been posted, and I would welcome either Samuel or Fabiola to respond. So the first question is from Ayub Hussein, and he says the government has removed the sunset clause on VAT deferment for imported capital goods. What is your view on the same? Samuel or Fabiola?
Yeah, I can take that. I think for me, in terms of that sunset clause removal, it gives industries more opportunity to import more equipment and things that are supposed to be used for capital goods for them to be able to invest more. So I think for me, it's more to support and give investors room to invest more from an equipment in terms of the expectation of what they're supposed to be producing that particular point in time. So I think it's a good move, if you were to ask me. And I think it should be encouraged that you give room for people to import more equipment for them to be able to produce more. And given there are certain sectors, specific sectors like mining, manufacturing, we do really need to import a bit of equipment in the country. Jennifer?
Okay. I will read the next question. Oh, this is very long. Okay, there's a question from Jovin. He says, regarding the tax holiday for newly registered taxpayers under the presumptive tax system, does it imply new TIN or even people with existing non-business TIN are now moving into business?
That is an interesting one because the proposed changes for newly registered traders, and yes, definitely you have people who have already registered with TIN numbers, and most of these TIN numbers are the ones that we normally use for purposes of driving licenses, which are not business registered TINs. So probably when we receive the finance bill or the finance act, it might probably be very clear in terms of who is the intention here. But again, given the fact that we are looking at a position where the government is intending to widen the tax base by increasing the number of taxpayers, for me, I'll believe they might be included in the net. But in terms of clarity, I think probably we should wait in terms of the finance bill, whether that will be able to clearly articulate who is going to be taken into that net. But given the fact the non-business TIN are not new registered TINs, then definitely there is no clarity when it comes to that particular proposed amendment from the budget by the Minister of Finance.
All right. There's also a very long question from Stefano Juventus. Stefano, would you want us to unmute your mic so that you can speak, because this is very long to read, but if you speak, yeah, you could, like elaborate. Hussein, can you unmute Stefano Juventus as I read another question? So there's another question from Ayub Hussein, and he says, how will this year's budget allocation enhance competitiveness and reduce cost of production for manufacturing companies like Alaf? How will this budget allocation enhance competitiveness and reduce cost of production for manufacturing companies?
I can take that. I think there are quite a number of measures that have been talked about, but if you look at specific for Alaf, who are producing sheets, I think one of the proposed measures that was introduced was an introduction of development levy at 10% on all imports of sheet iron products. So they do expect that is one of the measures to put the Tanzanian companies as competitive, because it will reduce in terms of having imported sheets that come through be charged more. So if you're importing sheets from other countries, you have to pay 10% development levy, and that will sort of increase that price and give the Tanzanian market a bit of an advantage when it comes to pricing of the local products that are going to be produced by local sheet producers. Apart from the other, in terms of other exemptions and reliefs that have been talked about by Obina, Fakil, and Good Victor, I think they are more or less discussing the same things around those specific exemptions and the reliefs that we're going to be having from a manufacturing site as well.
All right. Fabiola, you want to add?
Yeah, Jennifer, I just wanted to address, I think, the first comment from Stefano, and perhaps Stefano, feel free to reach out to us after the session so that we can probably go through all your questions. But in the interest of time, I can address your first question on the anticipated GDP growth and how this is going to be managed so as to not impact the small businesses. I think as part of the presentation earlier, we did mention some of the initiatives that the government is going to take towards promoting the domestic sources of revenue and also towards improving the GDP growth. And one of it was to encourage public-private dialogue with the private sector so as to encourage taxpayers and to hear them out and see what issues they're going through. But also we think the implementation of the reforms that were recommended by the Presidential Commission is probably going to create efficiency and ease in the tax payment process. So if these and other recommendations that have been made in the budget speech yesterday will be implemented, we believe that the government should be able to reach the targeted growth without necessarily causing disruption to the small and low income group. Thank you.
Okay, anybody that wants to unmute and speak? All your mics have now been enabled. Okay, as we wait, I can read one more question before I invite Alex. There's a question from Crispin which says, please explain in detail on withholding tax on sale of live animals. What does that imply to farmers who sell live animals like chickens?
Jennifer, I didn't get that. If you can repeat, please.
It says, please explain on withholding tax on sale of live animals and what it implies to, I think this would be small scale farmers who sell live animals like poultry.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting proposition. I think looking at the proposed amendment is specifically for live animals, and it's for corporations and companies paying on purchasing the live animals. But again, it's not specific in terms of whether payment goes to another entity in terms of corporation or institution, or whether payment goes to an individual as a person. So we do expect guidelines to come out for that, because we do know if payments between entities, then definitely whatever deduction that is going to be done is going to be an advanced tax for that particular entity. And now whether the payments for the individual is going to be a final withholding tax payment, that will be expected to come through the finance bill, in terms of whether the categorization of that withholding tax payment is going to go, whether it's an advanced tax for entities or whether it's a final tax when it comes to individuals. Probably one of the things to look out for in the finance bill.
Okay, there was a hand from Alex.
Yes, Jennifer, I had a question. We have seen the move by the government to try and do some reforms for taxes and fiscal regime for the country, which then led to the Presidential Commission that went through these reforms. And I know their report was issued and the proposals were set out. I just wanted to test and check, probably from Fabiola or Sam, to what extent some of those proposals came through in this budget as we see it from the speech.
I can take that, Alex. So as you've put it, when the Commission launched their recommendations, there are about 284 in total, but I think we are yet to see the full report to see what recommendations exactly were put in the report. However, for the ones that were made available during the launch of the report, we have seen most of them have gone in the budget, because they were really focusing on streamlining and creating efficiency in tax administration. So areas such as collaboration between the TRA and other regulators or the regional offices, also the adoption of AI and guidelines on how the local government charges should apply. We've seen all of these having been referred to by the minister. So for the ones that were made specific earlier this year, most of them, I think about 80% of them have gone in. But once I think the report is issued, we should be able to make an assessment of how much has been implemented. I would want to suppose that there may have been some technical recommendations in terms of the difficult points within the tax laws. But at this point, I think the government is trying to implement the tax administration ones to create efficiency as a short-term measure. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Also to let you know, the budget briefing has now been posted on the Q&A session. So I encourage all of you to download it. There's a post by Farid Hussein. It's called Tanzania Budget Brief. So you can click and download. Let me see if we can get 2 more questions before we close. There's a question from Musa saying, does the presumptive tax amendments include partnerships? And then let me read 2. And then another one says, as we welcome the good amendments to VAT refund process, do you see a room to have similar amendments in other tax types, such as income tax and excise? Can take those 2 questions.
Jennifer, I can take the one on VAT refunds. So I think that's Jovin's question. Jovin, we think that has now been put forward because VAT refunds have been a challenge in the recent past And we think that the minister's intention is to really fast track the VAT refunds that were already in the backlog. As for other taxes, these would go through the normal refund procedures under the Tax Administration Act. And I think because they're on a case-by-case basis, we do not anticipate that there will be a similar reform in the near future for the rest of the taxes, such as the Income Tax Act or any other taxes in case of tax paid in excess. So I think they're trying to address a very specific problem that really cuts across most of the businesses that are in the export area.
Okay.
The partnership one, partnerships have a specific rules in terms of its taxation, and it does not include presumptive tax. Presumptive tax is specifically for sole proprietors who operate as individuals and who pay taxes as individuals. So to respond to that particular question, I don't expect the presumptive tax regime to go to partnership, because partnership have a specific taxation regime tied to them. Their tax is a partnership, but again, at the end of the day, it's based on the allocation of income and gains received by each individual partner. So definitely, I won't expect that change in regime to affect partnership. But let's wait and see if the bill is going to take them into account. But given the current Income Tax Act that we have, we don't have partnerships taxed as presumptive. They're taxed as a partnership as a whole.
Okay. And there's a question that has been specifically directed to OB. I'll read it. On the cashless economy mandates, the digital payment requirements as a condition for business license renewal will probably hit distributor and retailer networks hard. Most of them operate heavily on cash. What are your thoughts on the compliance friction that may disrupt route to market?
Thanks for the question. I think this is one of those ones where when we see the bill itself, we will understand in more clearer details whether this would cover distributors and stockists or wholesalers, and even like van sales reps, because this is a real issue. And this is when I spoke earlier, I made the point around the time frame between when the budget is read and when implementation needs to start is quite short. So if this is the reality that people like distributors, people like stockists and wholesalers are expected to fully transition, and even down to the van sales reps, then it might become quite disruptive, because the process to set all of those things up and understand how it would work and do trials and test runs before you then fully go live might not be available. And closely linked to this, my concern is therefore potential implications on regulatory compliance from an audit point of view. So for instance, when the TRA then comes to audit those same people, to what extent would they be liable if they are not complying 100% from the 1st of July? I think clarity, and I'm really hoping that we will get some clarity on this one, and understand how the government wants to approach it, whether it's in a phased manner, whether they will concentrate on some specific sectors and industries. The way it's been listed, it appears to be the case, but it's a little bit ambiguous. So hopefully when we see the bill, there will be a lot more specificity and details that we can all hold on to. But it's something that everyone who is in the consumer goods business needs to be wary about, because if you have distributor partners and they have van sales reps and stockists or wholesalers, this is one life issue that we will all face, and it might be very disruptive for our respective businesses and industries. Thanks.
Thank you, Obi. I think in the interest of time, we've tried to respond to most of the questions in the chat, and I've not seen any hands up for people who want to unmute and ask questions. So if there are any additional burning questions, we're available. You can always contact us through either Fabiola or Samuel Isupu, and we will be happy to respond to any additional questions that you might have. Let us give a round of applause to our panelists as we now call upon our country managing partner, Alexander, for concluding remarks.
Wow. Jennifer, you can hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Yeah, so really to thank all the audience today. We really love having this landmark event every year. We have been doing it. We have enjoyed interaction, and then the process itself has been really, really fulfilling. Really happy and congratulate the panelists today, Fakihi, Good Victor, Obina. The insights have been really, really good, and have really enjoyed and been able to relate to some of the key sectors that have been driving our economy. And I think Sam, Fabiola, and the entire tax team, I know you did not have a good sleep last night to try and put this together with all the supporting colleagues out there. We remain thankful. And Jennifer for running this for us as usual, and the entire team there, and a lot that is happening in the background. Sabato, I think the analysis to the point, we really enjoyed it. We know there's a lot that is in the background. So the choice of what you wanted to talk about in this very event, we appreciate that process. We are sitting with the inaugural budget, if you like it, from Vision 2050 horizon. I think it's with that in mind, it's very critical that we are looking at a long-term, having a long-term view of where we want to get to. And for me, I think looking at the size of our economy as we are today, an estimate of approximately $90 billion. If you're talking about $1 trillion economy by 2050, you are speaking about 10 to 11%, 10 to 11 folds rather, not a percent, to get there. That is really significant change and transformation that is called into play as we speak. And some of the changes that have been suggested really are trying to get there, but we can always look at what is it that can still be done from longer term horizon to get there. We are seeing some good indication in terms of what it is that the tax revenues represent as a percentage of GDP. I think, as Fabiola spoke, from 11% over the past 7 years to about 13.5%. Still, there is a room to get a bit more, and I can relate to some of the measures that have been put across, especially on the digitization in trying to integrate the TRIS system with the rest of the government. I think it has been a long cry by the government. We have seen from the head of state where he wanted that integration to come in, and the famous mifumo ya serikali somane. So the integration of the government system that will have a meaning to us as businesses, also individual taxpayers, in terms of what is it that will have to be considered as we file our tax returns and pay those taxes. it's critical that we are able to go there together. There are some missed opportunities, and they've been really widely articulated by our panelists in terms of what the business community has been viewing to be areas that the government can still unlock potentials through policy reform. I think, good Victor, I relate to the Section 56 that you talked about, and the royalty question mark in terms of deductibility of that. These are some of the areas, especially the Section 56, that can unlock a lot of potential from capital side for the country to see, especially for the side of mineral and extractive sector. Given the risk associated with that sector and what the capital raising opportunities can bring if that particular section is looked into. And I think, Obina, the point you have raised in terms of the process as we go through these reforms, proposals coming through, whether we have enough time to debate those. What it is that can be published for us to see. I think if we are going into digitization and more evidence-based decision-making process, I think we have to come out clean and very open for conversation in terms of what it is that the players are seeing on the ground, the reason for some of the proposals not being adopted, and whether there could be any changes that can be co-created between the government and the private sector to ensure that our tax and fiscal regime is robust enough. I don't want to turn my closing remarks to another lecture. I know we've spent quite a bit of time. We are still on time. We still continue to ponder about these proposals. KPMG is available to continue the conversation. Reach out to the team. Let's have a conversation. If something did not go through now because we missed that opportunity, there is also a chance next year. As we look into this DIRA 2050, we should be available to contribute and make lives better for not only our people, but our organizations and the country, because we have a duty to do that as a business community as well. So thank you very much. Remain available. We will share some of the documents that we have shared here with you for you to read. But most importantly, we remain available to continue the conversation. At some point in this webinar, we reached 250 people. So we really, really like the turnout. So it means people are ready to have a conversation, and I'm sure our government is also going to make those changes in terms of the policy regime and the and really the process towards coming up with these budget proposals, so that then the engagement can also benefit our country as well. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the day. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you all.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a nice day.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye now.
Bye. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.